So yeah, as I was saying, there will be an assignment going live today at 11. 3 questions. There's no writing questions really. It's just testing, have you been paying attention? Have you been watching the actual stream? So later on in this stream, I will be giving you the answer to question 3, because the thing about question 3 is there is I didn't actually write what the question is on the assignment. It's basically says answer question 3 here. I'll tell you what that is in a little bit so you can actually get the answer correct. Again, it's just my personal way of making sure that everybody who's not here live right now is actually watching the stream all the way through, taking the notes like you're supposed to. Yeah, that's about it. I see a few people are commenting on last live stream's comment thread. I think Matthew and Dakota. So please try and just keep everything to this one so it's a little bit more organized. The reason why I do that is so if you are somebody who's watching the recording or the replay on Twitch, you can go back to chat.google.com. All of the comments that we had for that stream are going to be posted on there with timestamps so you know exactly when we said those. You can kind of sync it up with what I'm talking about. It's just there in case I don't read those out entirely. That's my bad. I should be doing that. But it's there for you to use. Also, chat.google.com is a great resource for you guys because if you have any questions about an assignment, notes, whatever, for me, you can create your own thread and I will answer that. I'm going to leave that up most of the day. So I should be able to get there and answer those. I have 3 monitors. 1 monitor for the rest of the day is going to be devoted to having that chat up there. Yes, I know Animal Crossing came out today. For the next 45 minutes or so, I'm going to ask you to put that aside and wait until we're done to keep playing. Okay. So I mean, it is a big deal, but just hold off on that until we're all done. I would really appreciate that. I see we have about 30 people live right now. That's awesome. That means half of you are here. Half of you, I hope, are going to be watching the live stream after this. So again, that is due technically Sunday, but if you're live, I promise you it will take you less than 1 minute to finish the assignment. Just make sure you get on there. Is my dog asleep? My dog is at my feet. Since it is the beginning of the stream and you asked, Alyssa, here's Percy. There he is. He doesn't like being in my lap a whole lot, but there he is. Hi. All right. Bye. All right. So let's get started with our notes for today. So last time we started out Unit 15, which is really going to be dealing with Cold War and post-World War II stuff in the United States and across the world. We focused a little bit on Germany and how that was divided up immediately after World War II, how the Allied countries wanted to take those extra steps to make sure another war was going to be prevented. But what was really happening throughout this entire time is there's a lot of focus on Germany when the real potential conflict was going to be between the 2 global superpowers, which was the United States and the USSR. And a lot of that was an ideological difference. An ideological means basically how they viewed that countries should be run. So the United States obviously dealing with capitalism versus communism in the USSR. Kinsley says, what is due? It's a 3-question homework. Again, it's kind of just a test to see, make sure everybody is doing what they're supposed to, make sure you're actually taking your notes. Next week will be a little bit more intense, as most classes are going to be. Ben, here, I appreciate that, you guys. I'm not taking attendance, obviously, but I really do appreciate when you post stuff there. Just lets me know who's all there and participating. All right. So moving on to the next one. I hope you guys have already figured out a system for your personal notes so you can have those ready. As we are going to continue to move on, you do need to make sure you have a way to take all of these notes. So post-war alliances, we talked about how the United States, Britain, France were kind of working together in Germany to make sure everything's working out. But these alliances continued across the globe. So to contain Soviet influences and communism across the globe, the U.S. set up alliances with many Western European countries in a security alliance called NATO, the North Atlantic Treaty Organization. a lot of these countries are what you might expect. I'm going to go to a different slide. Don't worry, I'm going to come back. But right here, we have some countries in NATO. You have Belgium, Canada, Denmark, France, Iceland, Italy, Luxembourg, Netherlands, Norway, Portugal, UK, United States, all forming this treaty. Okay, working together in the North Atlantic. You could see there, you have, across the Atlantic Ocean, all these different countries working together to try and contain this communist influence that's trying to, make its way across the globe. Of course, USSR wasn't willing to just let that happen and step back. They formed their own military alliance called the Warsaw Pact. Warsaw is the capital of Poland, so that's what they just assembled a whole bunch of their allies there and formed this lasting pact. So again, mutual protection against NATO, against against the United States and the allies there. Again, both sides hoping that nothing has to come to an actual war, but security measures are being made anyway. That's why it's called the Cold War. You're not going to see these two sides directly engage each other, but they are preparing as if that is an eventual possibility. All right. You had many international disputes also brought before a new world organization, the United Nations. So, can anybody kind of, well, first I'll talk about what the United Nations is. So, United Nations is still something that functions today, where you have basically every country across the world working in this big organization to try and keep peace, to try and settle international disputes with as little fighting as possible. Now, if we think back to World War I, there was something that was set up that was kind of supposed to serve the same function, same purpose. Can anybody remember what that is? In the chat, I'll see if anybody can remember. What was that similar organization set up by that Treaty of Versailles meant to keep the peace and keep everybody working together? As League of Nations, Dakota, way to go. That's correct. Yeah, League of Nations kind of had a similar purpose. Shamir, League of Nations, thank you. League of Nations had that similar purpose. They're trying to work together to prevent wars, to keep the peace. However, League of Nations had some severe flaws. Number one, you didn't have many of the major nations join that, like the United States. And then when people broke that, the League of Nations had very little power to act. And while the United Nations doesn't necessarily have that much global power even to today, but it does have a lot of influence. It serves a pretty important purpose. It doesn't work perfectly, but it certainly worked a lot better than the League of Nations did. You had 51 nations ratifying the UN Charter in 1945 and been fighting world problems in the years that followed. Even to today, they try and help out issues across the globe. Now, they don't have as much influence militaristically today as they perhaps used to, but they still make excellent progress in fighting hunger, disease, improving education, just generally trying to improve the world as a whole, or at least that's what the goal is. So that's still an organization that functions to this day. So we have NATO again, just a look at some of those countries that were a part of that to start off. A lot of again, North Atlantic. So this area right here, North Atlantic Ocean, and then that's kind of again, these countries all united for the stop of communism across the globe. So United Nations, many parts of the UN, you have the General Assembly, Security Council, Economic and Social Council, International Court of Justice, Secretariat, again, trying to settle these big issues between countries. Let's say, you had two countries who disputed who owns this chunk of land. The United Nations might be something that can help settle that. You have some milestones. In 45, the UN Charter is ratified, and at 48, they finally have a peacekeeping operation. And 48 as well, Universal Declaration of Human Rights. 96, Comprehensive Nuclear Test Ban Treaty. 2013, First UN Youth Assembly. 2015, Paris Climate Agreement. That's a big thing in politics to this day. Won't go too much into that, but it's something to keep in mind. Location. So the headquarters are in New York. So if they ever have a big meeting, but you have the International Court of Justice. So if there's disputes, there's things that need to be settled. through the United Nations judicial system, if you will. That's in The Hague, which is in the Netherlands. So, and you can see the growth of membership there. Basically, it starts off with 51 countries here, the red, and then all these would be other countries that are in the world but not technically members. And you can see how that grows to the point where almost every recognized country is at least a part of the United Nations. There are few exceptions in there, which are not always universally recognized countries, but those are specific individual things that are case by case. So, with the United Nations now set up, with NATO, and the United States trying to recover and grow after the war, they felt like they had the upper hand for a while in this Cold War. That is until 1949. That changes when the U.S. learns that the USSR had tested their own atomic bomb. No longer were the United States the supreme country with the biggest weapon, the only one that can use it and can basically boss around all the other countries. All of a sudden now USSR has a weapon of their own, and they realize that what happened to Japan with Hiroshima and Nagasaki could now potentially happen on US soil, and they have to take every effort to make sure that that does not come to be. Another shock after they hear this news, you have communist forces in China led by Mao Zedong gaining power. We think back, especially to those World War II videos that we watched, how the United States had actually tried to play an important part in China, helping them fight off Japanese influence. But after World War II is over, that kind of all goes against them. The United States had actually backed some of these more democratic leaders in China, and then all of a sudden they were overthrown by the communist forces. The American-backed nationalists fled to Taiwan, where they still have an important influence there today. Now, China oftentimes claims that Taiwan is not its own independent country, while much of the rest of the world says that Taiwan is its own independent country. It's one of those those disagreements that we talked about, that I was hinting at on last slide. But you have Taiwan. It's this island nation that is off the coast of China, where this more democratic leadership left, and China, this now finally reunited massive nation, starting to finally come into power on its own. China had, obviously, as we know today, is one of the most influential countries in the world, but for a lot of history it had been divided, fighting itself, never really fully coming into the global stage. And finally, for the first time, now led by Mao Zedong, they were going to begin to do that. One positive thing for the United States in terms of this anti-communism viewpoint is that communist leaders in China and the Soviet Union disagreed with each other, fighting with each other, never fully being unified as a force. But together, the nations controlled almost a quarter of the globe. So you have a huge part of the world now is under severe communist leadership. And obviously that continues to fuel the fear that communism is going to spread even farther. All right. So that is going to be the end of lesson 1. Is there anything that I need to go back and cover for anybody so far? Looking in both chats, or well, the chat on Google, because you can't say anything in the other one. But hold on, did somebody comment in the wrong thread? Got a weird notification. If there's anything you need me to go back and cover, I can certainly do that. Otherwise, we're going to be moving forward to lesson 2 out of 7. Again, we're going to try and move quickly here. Since we're not meeting every day, I do need to go at a slightly faster pace. It means I'm cutting out a little bit of what I would cover if we were like in school. Can I go back to Postwar Alliances, Grace? Absolutely, I will go back there. Anyway, moving on to lesson 2, we're going to talk about the Korean War. We're going to get through as much of that as we can. It's actually really fascinating period of time that kind of gets brushed over because it's so close to World War II, but it's important, something important to highlight there. Do you want me to read them off again? Or so first thing, the U.S. set up alliances with many Western European countries in a security alliance called NATO, the North Atlantic Treaty Organization. And then the USSR formed its own military alliance, the Warsaw Pact. Awesome. Was there an essential question in the beginning? Yes, Georgia. What is America's role in the world? We'll cover that later as well. Thank you guys for asking questions. I really do appreciate it because, makes it feel like this all worth it instead of just videoing myself. I do like doing this stuff. All right. Lesson 2, Korea and other post-war conflicts. Maybe like a good question for me to include on an assignment or something like that, so just keep that in mind. Korea and other post-war conflicts. So, Korea, we didn't really talk about them in World War II, did we? Yeah, what is America's role in the world? That's kind of the question I'm asking you, Haley. So you'll have to start thinking about that. I hinted at at some of the things yesterday, so you can always go back and rewatch those, even if you were there. But moving forward, so World War II, we didn't really talk about Korea during World War II at all, and that's because they had actually been under Japanese influence. They had been under Japanese control since the 1910s. So there wasn't a whole lot of focus there in terms of ongoing fighting, but they had been under Japanese influence since that time. And after World War II ended, Japan basically was driven out of Korea, and Korea was more or less given its own independence. What was the title of lesson 2, says Melissa? That is Korea and other post-war conflicts. Remember, this broadcast is always up, so if there's like a question that you need to double check, the archives go live on Twitch immediately after I'm done. So you don't have to wait for me to upload it to YouTube, because right now YouTube is bogged down. It takes a long time to get everything up, but all right. So Korea is under Japanese influence, and after World War II is over and Japan is getting driven out of all of these areas where they had been controlling, Korea was basically divided up. North Korea was occupied by the USSR as they move in to the northern portion, and after the bombs are dropped and Japan surrenders, U.S. moves into the southern portion of Korea as well. Again, both countries are trying to spread their influence, promote capitalism, democracy versus communism. And they end up kind of meeting at this midway point, the 38th parallel of latitude. They agreed that the country would soon be reunited, but there was obviously this question of, okay, well, what is Korea going to become? Is Korea going to become a communist country? Now, remember, Korea is very, very close to Japan and Russia in terms of just proximity. North Korea borders both of those. So it kind of made sense for in the eyes of many that it was going to be falling to those influence, becoming communist. But the United States was determined to make sure that's not going to happen. We want to have this democratic ally in this part of the world that we can always rely on and continue to help spread the right way of doing things, spread democracy and capitalism in this part. Remember, capitalist countries are able to profit off of each other, while communist countries can profit more off of each other that way. So that's why both countries are trying to spread that influence. So they divide at this 38th parallel right here, and that's what I'll refer to that border several times, the 38th parallel. And in June 1950, receiving basically permission from the USSR, North Korean troops sweep across the 38th parallel, overwhelming the South Korean army and pushing them back and back and back. Truman obviously is not okay with this. He asked the UN to authorize a military response. They agree and send a force commanded by General Douglas MacArthur. That's now the third unit we've managed to reference Douglas MacArthur in. Just kind of interesting how that goes. Important person. And at this point, how do you think the United States views General Douglas MacArthur? Like the general public, what do they think about him? Take a guess in chat. Nobody wants to take a guess? No? Well, let's think about what is General Douglas MacArthur at this point. He is a war hero. They liked him, says Matthew. Of course they did. He is an incredibly popular person. He had commanded the forces in the Pacific. He had promised he would return to the Philippines, kept that promise, and was viewed as this awesome guy who led the United States to a victory. So, very popular person. And as he starts to get involved, it kind of is a person for the United States to rally behind. So, what they do is they're getting involved after the forces have already swept through much of South Korea, and it was looking like there wasn't a whole lot left. So they decide to land here in Incheon and push back down. So as basically a surprise invasion against these Korean forces, they push down on them and drive them back. So right here, this green line, this first initial push by the North Koreans, they got almost the entire country of Korea under their control, but MacArthur and the UN forces sweep in and push them back, and they continue to push them back, and continue to push them back, continue to go back and back to this blue line here, almost managing to drive all the forces out of Korea and secure it for the democratic South Korean side. Of course, that is halted by now China deciding to get involved. They send their own troops in and start pushing back and back and back to this dotted line right here. And that's as far as they get in 1951. So you can see this seesaw back and forth battle, and that is obviously going to be very, very taxing for civilians, but for the troops as well. So MacArthur's forces landing in Incheon behind North Korean lines, and the North Koreans were forced back across the 30th parallel and continue back and back and back. Now, Truman and his advisors wanted to punish North Korea for its aggression. They wanted to show that this is not okay, especially in this post-war time. We want to make sure we're handling things peacefully and diplomatically. So, with this in mind, MacArthur drives past the 38th, deep into North Korean territory, as we saw there, all the way back to this blue line, almost taking the entire land. But at that point where China gets involved, they warned that it did not sit back as it perceived the North Korean invasion as a threat on its own security. Now, remember, they have communist leaders in charge, so now they don't like the United States at all. And they see this UN, which is led by mostly democratic capitalist countries, moving closer and closer towards them. So they decide to get involved and help the communist side out. So they deploy their own troops, and they fight back and push the line even further across the 38th parallel again. And basically, it had become this bloody deadlock, the seesaw back and forth. Neither side was making a whole lot of progress, and it's incredibly taxing. Okay, I'm going to keep on there because there are a few notes. But continuing to go back and forth. And what ends up happening is throughout this conflict, you have over 3 million people die. Now, obviously, we think about back just to the World War II, where we had our estimate. Does anybody remember that estimate of people that we talked about of casualties in World War II? Anybody remember those numbers that we had? I wish I could give you 30 to 60 million. Melissa, well done. Good job remembering that. So, you think you have that comparison. So 3 million doesn't seem that much, but you really have to put that in context. That's a huge amount of people. And what's actually interesting is there's a higher rate of civilian deaths in the Korean War than even in World War II, where there was a lot of civilian deaths as well. But so that they're the side that's feeling this the most. And with no progress really being made, the war kind of stalls out. And the UN forces, led by MacArthur, saw only one real way that this was going to end in a decisive American victory. And that was going to be to attack China. But Truman, he disagrees. And he thinks, okay, well, if we attack China, that's going to lead to another full-scale world war. USSR might even back China at this point, since they are a little bit more linked up there in terms of how they run their countries. and we could have a full-scale, all-out war now with nuclear weapons on both sides. USSR probably wouldn't hesitate necessarily. Yes, I'll go back. Wouldn't necessarily hesitate to use that, at least in the mind of leaders. So they wanted to make sure that this is a satellite war fought in Korea that doesn't get involved in any of the major players' countries, like the actual lands of the USSR, the United States, China. They want to try and keep this isolated. So instead of pushing towards victory, Truman kind of orders MacArthur to halt. Now, MacArthur doesn't like that, as you can imagine. Being told basically that you're not actually allowed to take these aggressive actions to get heavily involved. Yeah, no problem, y'all. To get heavily involved, basically you're asking them to stop fighting the best way that they know how. MacArthur had clearly proven that he was more than capable, and he thought he should be the one that makes this call, that actually has it, actually pushes towards victory. As he says, there is no substitute for victory. He publicly talks against Truman. Now, remember, Truman actually holds an important role in the Army, as every president does. What is the title for the president in terms of their militaristic title? What are they technically called? What role do they have? I'll wait for a comment. See if Eagle. Well, that's like a code name. But what's their title technically called? I'll give you the first word if we can't think of it. Commander in Supreme Military Commander. Well, it's basically the role, but it's Commander in Chief, right? So they are the ultimate. They're the final. They have the final say in all of this. And technically, MacArthur couldn't go against the orders, so he ends up getting fired. And peace talks begin in 1951. Little progress is made, but no longer are we having these massive campaigns going across this country. So now we are going to move forward towards the election of 1952. Now, don't worry if you're somebody who knows the story of the election of 1948 and that famous picture. We'll go back. We're going to cover that next lesson. Is Percy making noise? I don't know if you could hear. But anyway, sorry. But we're going to cover the election in 1952. Now, think back to what we said about MacArthur and his popularity. That didn't just apply to MacArthur. That also applied to the Supreme Military Commander in Europe, which was Dwight D. Eisenhower. In Europe during World War II, he commanded much of the Allied forces there. And when he returned back home after the war, he was also massively popular. And he decides to get involved in politics. So the Republicans decide to nominate Eisenhower in 1952 against Adlai Stevenson. Now, something to kind of keep in mind here. It had been an incredibly long time since the Republicans had actually managed to win. Only 2 presidents, technically, but that's 6 elections because of FDR. Well, actually, not 6 elections. That would be 5 elections because Truman only was elected one time. My bad. But still 20 years. So the Eisenhower is nominated, and part of what helps the Republicans is the fact that Truman was not massively. I will take. Are you guys hearing him, or is it just me? Because he's just driving me crazy right now. Sorry. Take this. Nobody's saying anything? Okay, fine, whatever. Moving forward then. So Truman was all of a sudden hit with this wave of unpopularity because he had. Yeah, you can. Sorry. Maybe I'll have to make sure he's in his cage if he can't quiet down. All right. So Truman's hit with this wave of unpopularity, which obviously carries over to Democrats as well, because of his firing of MacArthur, the way he handled that whole Percy Jackson. No, he's not named after that. Just my dog. Hit with this wave of unpopularity, and that carries over. And oftentimes you'll see that there's just going to be kind of a change in politics over the course of a couple elections, even if things are going overall well. It's fine. He's ambience. I appreciate that, Dakota. But unpopular, and it ends up going over to the election ends up going over to the Republicans pretty strongly. You can see that map there. It's just the South again going Democratic. Most of the rest of the nation going Republican. All right. At this point, I'm going to tell you the answer to question 3. The question is, what's my dog's name? My dog's name is Percy. So on question 3, the assignment is live now, actually. Just put Percy, and you'll get full credit. All right. Next one. So Democrats nominate Adlai Stevenson. Eisenhower actually promises to get involved. If you want to get started, that's fine. Just please keep up the stream, as because we're not quite done. There's not a whole lot more, but we are we're getting there. So he promises to go to Korea if he wins. Obviously, his military background leads a lot of people to have confidence and faith in his ability to gain peace overseas. And for the first time, Eisenhower wins. For the first time in 20 years, Republicans take back the White House. I like Ike. You may have heard that before. That's kind of his slogan and his nickname, Ike. And it ends up sweeping across, and he wins a pretty solid victory. Percy is not calm right now. I don't know why. He's still a puppy, technically. Anyway, so Armistice. This is actually where we're going to leave off for today, because it seems like a natural stopping point, but we still want to make sure we are... okay, yeah. There we go. And he jumped off immediately. I'm sorry. All right, so I want to share the end of this and one interesting story there. What was the Electoral College score thingy for the election? Thank you, Matthew. You can... Obviously, I don't have the exact numbers right now, but you can kind of count it up. It was very, very lopsided. You see California, Texas, Illinois, Ohio, Pennsylvania, New York, all going over towards Republicans. Not they have very little counter to that in terms of the Democratic one states. All right. So Eisenhower keeps his promise and visits Korea a few weeks after his victory. Both sides are ready for peace. So after long negotiations, prisoners of war are returned, and the issue was turned over to an international commission to try and figure out how they can divide this up peacefully and hopefully gain a lasting peace. But what ends up happening is a little different. Instead of getting this long-lasting peace that carries on, they kind of have this war that is on pause forever. Even to this day, as you probably know, both Koreas, North and South, do not get along great with each other. Both sides still have this idea of reunification someday. And we think back to last Summer Olympics, where Korea actually competed as one unified country, kind of as a step towards this reunification goal that many people still hold. However, the differences between two countries are still very, very vast. They have some extremely different ideological beliefs. North Korea, as we know, is still one of the premier communist forces, even if they refuse to call themselves that. In today's politics, one of the biggest threats that we are still dealing with as the United States today, the potential threat of North Korea. Of course, funny enough, North Korea claims that they have no cases of the coronavirus in their entire country, that they figured it out, and then the way they do it is definitely best. It's just an example of how the government in those type of extremely strictly controlled countries has a tendency to lie, or potentially what people like to think is that, oh well, if they have somebody with coronavirus, they just they no longer have the privileges to live anymore. So even throughout all of this, be thankful we live in a country like the United States where we still can maintain most of our freedoms even throughout this quarantine. All right. So the armistice in between North and South Korea sets up this DMZ, this demilitarized zone, which is basically heavily guarded on both sides by forces from North and South Korea. And the United States actually still has an important role there in South Korea. They've kept helping supply and even have troops stationed there just in case a war ever breaks out. And that brings us into the last part for today, which is Operation Paul Bunyan, which is an interesting little story about the DMZ and the year's fall. I believe it was in 1973, where both sides have to keep a close watch on this zone to make sure there's no advancement, no progress made from either side that is against the treaty, against the armistice that had been signed. And one issue that the South Korean side and the United States side had been facing was there's this really, really big tree that was cutting off part of the sight line that they really wanted over one of these valleys. So they decide, you know what, we're going to have some soldiers go out there and we're going to cut that tree down, right? That seems pretty reasonable. So they send out a small group of forces with axes to go and cut down this pretty massive tree. And as they do that, the North Korean side sees that these people are coming over towards to this tree, and they send out their own group of soldiers. They say, "Wait, no, please stop! Don't cut down this tree. This tree was planted and raised by our supreme leader himself. He's the one who planted it there and had it grow. So if you cut down this tree, we're going to consider that an incredibly aggressive action." So they're like, "What?" And they continue anyway. So they go over and they take the North Korean side takes the axes away and murders the two soldiers who would come out actually on this mission. And after that, they both sides retreated. They were shocked at this aggressive action, so they decided to formulate Operation Paul Bunyan. They still needed this tree down, but they didn't want to go to actual war. So they come out with machine guns, with all of these, and just shoot down this entire tree. It falls over, and they retreat back. Kind of a weird, funny way of dealing with it. Paul Bunyan, of course, is the mythological or folk tale-y lumberjack guy from long ago. So just kind of an interesting way that conflict has continued to even this day. Kind of a weird, funny story. But anyway, yeah. So that continues even to now, and that's basically what we're going to cover with the Korean War. Now you could go into a lot of, like everything, you can go into Korean War in a lot more detail. I'd love to have the chance to do that, but just kind of hitting the main points there because there's a lot that we still need to go cover. So that's where we're going to cut off our notes for today. Remember, assignment right now, it should be open. It will take literally 30 seconds. Get that done, get that turned in if you can. Make sure your notes are getting written down somewhere. Make sure if you haven't already found a good way to do that, think about it for next week because we are going to be going live on Monday. Remember, from now on, history is going to be Monday and Wednesday, not on Friday unless something changes or comes up. I'm leaving this chat open for you to ask me questions at any point. Please feel free to do so. Let's see. I'll see you at 1:30. We are going to be talking about grades, and you got 0 because of misspelling. Don't worry, this is not going to be graded. Again, we're going to talk about what grades are going to look like, I think, at 1:30. If you misspelled something, don't worry. It's just meant to grade there. You got a 0, though? How can you misspell all of these? There's one that's multiple choice. Anyway, I'll look at it later, Shamir, and I'll get you an answer. Okay, I do appreciate the comment though, so getting that dealt with. Any other questions for me before I get off? Also submitted my assignment. Okay, hopefully not an issue. Real quick, they'll look a little bit different going forward. Don't worry. I said I got it. It said I got it right, but it was a 0. What will we do on Friday? This is Friday. Oh, you mean like going forward? There's not going to be schoolwork on Friday. So hopefully you can just use that time to either catch up or maybe we'll find some fun stuff to do potentially. I'd like to. We're not doing Google Meet anymore. We are going to be doing it through Zoom. Yeah, Zoom is a little bit better from what we've seen. We've been playing around with it. It's going to work pretty well. It's going to be in the same spot, the same link, the same location. Just click on that link. But sixth grader. But what do we put for 3? If you were watching carefully, I said so. It said what that was, but I'll say it once more. I'm going to actually end the recording so people who are watching it just can't get that information real quick. So if you're watching on YouTube, bye.